Hi everyone, and welcome to a Ocean Rift Terence McKenna smash up. Yes, who'd have thunk? This is an excerpt from podcast 504 from the Psychedelic Salon by Lorenzo. We are descendants of stoned apes, and Terence goes into a fascinating discussion here with on virtual reality. So I'm gonna swim with some dolphins and listen. So join me. Why don't you? Bubble, bubble. Toil and trouble.
I have to have another cup of coffee, but with a J in order to be, keep it going. And, then there's sugar regulation on the side of this. And then when you add into it, non-invasive drugs like television. I mean, the average American watches 4.5 hours of TV a day. Imagine if there was a drug that made that kind of claim on people's time. My God, we'd regard Western civilization as going to hell in a handbasket. But, the drugs of the future are likely to be these non-invasive electronic drugs. I just finished writing an article on virtual reality for Magical Blend magazine. Do you all know what virtual reality is? Virtual reality is a technology being very, very rapidly perfected and brought to market, where you put on a silk glove with sensors at every joint, and you put on a hood with television screens very close to your eyes, or fiber optic screens very close to your eyes, and you're in a reality. You're in another world. It's a world that you can touch, you can feel. But it's a different kind of world than this world, because in that world, if you want to go somewhere, if I wanted to see the TV set over there, you point, and it comes to you. You open your hand, it stops moving toward you. Close your hand into a fist, it rotates you 180 degrees in the phase space. It's called virtual reality. Oh, well, Mattel has already begun to market. You've probably seen ads for it and just closed your mind. The glove of power. Have you seen these ads? The glove of power. And that's just a Nintendo system. And what it does is it images the glove on the screen. You put on this glove. There's a glove on the screen. You wiggle your thumb. It wiggles. There's a lever on a machine in the game. You reach out and you pull it, and the lever reacts. And this is with Cradola equipment. I mean, I couldn't believe the primitiveness of this scene. I felt like it was like a science fair project gone apeshit. But what they're talking about, is very fast processing of images at extremely great depth. They're going to do this. The entertainment potential of it is clear. This has to do with some of the scenarios of the future that we'll talk about this afternoon, because virtual reality is very important to creating a sane human future. No, that's something else. That's brain stimulation technology to cause... Yeah, that's a different thing. I will talk about it a little. It's the idea that there are machines that can duplicate drug experiences or create equally interesting neurological experiences. And it's done with goggles, with flashing lights around the perimeter, and then a sound. By varying the frequency and amplitude of the flashing light as it beats against the incoming sound, you can create very interesting neurological states. They're not... Well, they are and they aren't like psychedelics. Nothing is very much like a really breakaway psychedelic experience. But it is interesting that with these machines, so much imagery and so much color can be coaxed out of these setups. Just a few weeks ago, I was at a place in Berlin called Relax Berlin. And it's a place designed for yuppies on their dinner, office breaks, to come and spend 40 minutes under these machines. And So far, I haven't seen any that have really impressed me. They all work much better if you smoke some dope, which probably is going to be the last word on them for a while. The virtual reality is much different. The virtual reality is not a neurological chaos. It's a programmed reality of some sort. I mean, the one I was in was, so banal it brought tears to your eyes, but what it was an office. It was a reception area. A reception area, and then you walk through a door, and then there was a large desk with a telephone on it and a bookcase with a couple of books in it. But I discovered something immediately. I mean, it was not an intended discovery. I forgot that if you point at something, it moves toward you, or you appear to move away from it. And I would just let my pointing hand drift downward. And when I would do that, I would burst through the ceiling of the office, and then if I didn't change my position, the office and the attached antechamber just were shrinking smaller and smaller in a kind of olive drab space that I was clearly, flying into infinity, and there was nothing else in this reality. Well, so then I did the fist thing. It turned me around 180 degrees, and then I could get back down to the office hanging in this olive drab space. But it's a freaky technology because the human visual apparatus is unbelievably forgiving of error. In fact, the human visual apparatus is set up to suppress error. So even though you have this fairly Mickey Mouse technology, your eye and your brain are just working like dogs to make it all into a real world and to paper over all the weird stuff about it, Well, so if the technology can come closer, the brain is waiting to fill in all the chinks and make it very nice. It's manufactured, it's just very costly. It's at the level now where the only reason you would buy one is if you wanted to experiment with it. You were a company or so filthy rich that it just didn't matter. $50,000. Oh, it's coming down. The way they envision it, you see, what it requires is it requires very large and fast parallel processing computers. It is not something that's going to be standalone in the home. It's going to be sold over cable so that the really powerful computers to do this will be accessed over the phone lines. What the end consumer will have is simply the helmet and the glove, and then they want to do a full body stocking so that your whole body will be in there. And then they have the big research project they're working on now is called RT for Two, Reality for Two. And you can see the implications. If you can get one other person in there with you, you can get everybody. If you can get one, you can have 50,000. Jared Lanier's thoughts on the matter. Yeah. Yes, well, Gibson, who knew nothing about computers, was the first person to come up with this concept. He called it cyberspace. He just thought that very large databases should be configured to be like physical objects so that you know your way around, so that, you jack into cyberspace. This enormous red rectangle, the size of the Empire State Building, that is the Wells Fargo database. Further on down the boulevard, that turquoise trapezoid, that is Defense Department data. And then on the other side of the street and 2 blocks over is the National Medical Index. In other words, he said these databases should be thought of as places, and we'll create a world, a virtual world, where you travel from place to place to get data. You see, the interesting thing, if any of you are familiar with the Macintosh computer interface, what makes it so user-friendly is that it treats everything like ordinary objects, so that as monkeys, we understand perfectly how to do this. I mean, when you're in a program like Full Paint and you want a paintbrush, you must go and get your paintbrush. And when you're done using it, you must put it back in your toolbox. Now, there is no toolbox and there is no paintbrush. They're virtual. But nevertheless, you treat them the same way you treat non-virtual objects, as they're coming to be called.
This kind of equipment should not be in the hands of people.
Well, you know, Tim Leary said years ago, LSD is a substance which can cause psychotic reactions in people who don't take it. And, you know, I've seen a lot of psychosis caused by drugs that people didn't take. I mean, see, it's all, the Western mind is so quirky. I mean, we would accept a machine, I think, the fact that television has gotten as far as it has with as little criticism. But if people were smoking pot 4.5 hours a day, I mean, there'd be a national soul-searching uproar over it. So we just have certain biases and certain canalized ways of thinking that are easier for us to move down. The future isn't very comforting for that kind of know-nothingism, because electronic stimulation is very, very possible. And the difference, you know, computers are becoming more like drugs. Drugs are becoming more like computers. The computers of the future will be taken orally, and the drugs of the future will probably be jacked into. So getting hung up on the language of it, the important issue is the alteration of consciousness. What is it and what is it good for? What does it say about who we are? What can we do with it? The reason the people who've produced virtual reality, the people who are in charge of trying to think of something neat to do with it, haven't gotten very far. I mean, of course it will make astonishing pornography possible. Of course, cleaning up radioactive waste spills will now be very easy. Fixing space stations, if you happen to have one, will be less of a problem with virtual reality, because you'll go in virtual reality outside, find the box, lift the lid, turn the screw. You'll do it 10 times in virtual reality before you'll actually put on the suit and go out. But what I think virtual reality is good for is showing each other the insides of our minds, that we are going to be able to create art like nothing that has ever been seen before. In fact, one of the mavens of virtual reality, Eric Gullickson, has predicted that most designing in the 21st century will be virtual design. I mean, when you think that, you know, it costs nothing to design a Piranesi cathedral than it does to design a modest A-frame, because the thing is going to be built of light. So everybody can live at Versailles if that level of ostentation is attractive to them. I think that I look forward to this. I want to take the architectural perspectives of Bibiena and walk through those, you know, mile-long colonnaded corridors with reflecting pools and all that sort of thing. And then what interests me about virtual reality on another level is, it goes back to the DMT experiences that we talked about earlier this morning, that on DMT, the way in which these entities communicate is with a visible language, a language that's beheld rather than heard with the ears. Well, this is a higher signal, it's a better signal less degradation of intentionality in a visibly beheld signal. You know, the old rap, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I think we could create a new modality of communication in virtual reality, modeled on the psychedelic experience. I mean, what would it be like to slave a voice synthesizer to a virtual reality with software instructions such that, for example, every time I use the connector and a fluorescent turquoise polygon would become suspended in the air. And every time I used a certain verb, a different kind of topological manifold would be plugged in to the connector. In other words, if we changed the stuff of language into virtual tinker toys, then we could use our voice to drive an assembly of visible objects in the virtual reality. Do you follow what I'm talking about? Good. Well, it's noon, so time for lunch. We'll be back here at...
Hope you enjoyed that. That was Terence McKenna's thoughts way back in 1989. Wow. He would have loved this, I think. Thank you very much for watching. Catch you next time. Bye. Bye.